Welcome to Saturday Night at the Movies. I'm your host, Glenn Holland. Tonight's film is the classic crime drama The Maltese Falcon, directed by John Huston, who also adapted the screenplay from the 1930 novel by Dashiell Hammett. The film stars Humphrey Bogart and Mary Astor, with Sidney Greenstreet, Peter Lorre, Lee Patrick, and Elisha Cook Jr. Critic Richard T. Jameson called it the most triumphantly well-cast movie from Hollywood's golden age, rivaled only by Casablanca. The film begins in the offices of Detective Sam Spade and his partner, Miles Archer. A young woman, Ruth Wonderly, wants help locating her sister, who she says is involved with a man named Floyd Thursby. Although he and Spade are skeptical about her story, Archer agrees to follow Thursby. Early the next morning, Spade receives a call from the police telling him Archer has been killed. After visiting the scene, Spade tries to contact Miss Wonderly, but discovers she is checked out of her hotel. Two police detectives grill Spade at his apartment and tell him Floyd Thursby has also been killed. They suspect Spade of the murder. Spade again meets his client, who now calls herself Bridget O'Shaughnessy. She says Thursby was in fact her partner, and she suspects he shot Archer, although she doesn't know who killed Thursby. Spade doesn't trust her, but he agrees to investigate the murders. Back at his office, Spade encounters Joel Cairo, a mysterious man who offers him $5,000 to find a black figure of a bird. When Spade later tells O'Shaughnessy about Cairo, it becomes clear the two know each other. They also know and fear the Fat Man, who is also in San Francisco and also anxious to get his hands on the black bird. Although the 1941 version of The Maltese Falcon was the third film based on Hammett's novel, it was otherwise a collection of firsts. The Maltese Falcon was John Huston's directorial debut, and the first film to feature longtime stage actor Sidney Greenstreet. The leading role of Sam Spade was the first to present the star persona that would define Humphrey Bogart's characters for the rest of his career. And critics generally consider The Maltese Falcon to be the first film noir, with its pervading sense of corruption, shifting loyalties, shady characters, dark streets, and a femme fatale who tempts the hero to do what his good sense tells him he shouldn't. Dashiell Hammett was best known in Hollywood for The Thin Man, published in 1934. Hammett's novel was brisk and witty, and William Powell and Myrna Loy as the detective couple Nick and Nora Charles endeared themselves to movie audiences over a series of 6 Thin Man films. But The Thin Man was never meant to be anything other than an agreeable entertainment. Hammett's other novels, like The Dane Curse, the basis for films in 1935 and 1942, were much darker. Hammett was the best representative of a group of popular mystery writers, sometimes known as the Black Mask Boys, after the pulp crime magazine that published their work. Hammett's detective stories were a direct challenge to the genteel mysteries of the British crime school, best exemplified by the work of Agatha Christie. As Raymond Chandler, himself the creator of Detective Philip Marlowe, wrote in The Simple Art of Murder, Hammett took murder out of the Venetian vase and dropped it into the alley, back to the kind of people that commit it for reasons, not just to provide a corpse. He put these people down on paper as they were, and he made them talk and think in the language they customarily used for the purpose. That language was taut and spare, unadorned. Chandler compares it to the language in Ernest Hemingway's stories and novels. Yet for all I know, Chandler adds, Hemingway may have learned something from Hammett. Dashiell Hammett wrote from experience. He worked for a time as a private investigator for the Pinkerton Detective Agency in San Francisco, the location of the Maltese Falcon. Some of the characters in the novel were based on real people, but not the character of Sam Spade. Hammett said, Spade has no original. He is a dream man in the sense that he is what most of the private detectives I worked with would like to have been, and in their cockier moments, thought they approached. The first film adaptation of The Maltese Falcon was released with that title in 1931. The film starred Bebe Daniels and Ricardo Cortez and had a lighter tone and looser pacing than the 1941 version. It also included sexually suggestive situations. Its Spade was a real ladies' man, and many overt references to homosexuality. After the Motion Picture Production Code was put into effect in 1934, movies could no longer include that sort of material, and the 1931 version of The Maltese Falcon was unseen in the United States for 3 decades. In 1966, the film was made available for television under a new title, Dangerous Female. The 1941 version supposedly eliminated the sexual situations and the references to homosexuality, but in fact both remain, albeit in more subtle forms. A second, much looser adaptation of Hammett's novel was released in 1936 under the title Satan Met a Lady. It starred Bette Davis and Warren William as a detective now called Ted Shane. This attempt at a light-hearted caper film was a disaster. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times wrote, "There is no story, merely a farrago of nonsense representing a series of practical studio compromises with an unworkable script. It's the kind of mistake over which the considerate and discreet thing is to draw the veil of silence." Bette Davis herself later dismissed Satan Met a Lady as junk. John Huston hated both of these attempts to make a film of The Maltese Falcon. He was especially annoyed by the happy endings Warner Brothers had tacked on to the 2 earlier films. Huston's screenplay, like the 1931 version, followed the plot of the novel very closely. It left out only a very few of the book's scenes and took most of its dialogue directly from the novel. Like Hammett, Huston put Spade right at the center of the action. Many scenes in the film are shot over Spade's shoulder, allowing the audience to share his point of view. Spade, in fact, appears in every scene of the film except the murder of Miles Archer, and that scene was added only because the studio insisted on it. He shot the film in sequence except for the exterior shots, allowing his cast to build tension organically as the story progressed. Despite a culture of pranks on the set and heavy drinking among the cast after the day's shooting, Huston brought his production in 2 days ahead of schedule and $54,000 under budget. For some of its stars, the film was the beginning of long-term friendships. Humphrey Bogart would go on to work with John Huston again in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre and Key Largo, both in 1948, and The African Queen in 1951, among other films. He also starred again with Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre in Casablanca in 1942, and Passage to Marseille in 1944. Bogart said of The Maltese Falcon, "It was practically a masterpiece. I don't have many things I'm proud of, but that's one." The Maltese Falcon was also Peter Lorre's favorite of his films. He made 9 more movies with Sidney Greenstreet, including The Mask of Demetrius in 1944 and Three Strangers in 1946. The black bird at the center of The Maltese Falcon isn't called that until Gutman says near the end, "If you lose a son, it's possible to get another. There's only one Maltese Falcon." It's true that the Grand Master of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem had to pay an annual tribute to the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V for granting his order the island of Malta. And the tribute, due on All Saints' Day, was indeed one falcon, but a live falcon. Hammett invented the idea of the golden jeweled statuette. There were several 11.5-inch tall falcon statuettes made for use in the film. Some were made of plastic resin, and some were lead, depending on what the statuette was used for in a given scene. At least 3 of the original statuettes still exist. They're conservatively valued at over $1 million each. This means they are the most valuable movie props ever made, and that each one is now worth more than 3 times what it cost to make the Maltese Falcon in 1941. Please join us again next time for another Saturday Night at the Movies. I'm Glenn Holland. Good night.